Hello and welcome to the second video about the Savage Worlds 4.6 rule set for Fantasy Grounds. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I would suggest you go and watch that first, then come back here and join us with part 2. To begin with, I shall cover armour and power armour modifications. Some of this was shown in part 1 when we were talking about heavy armour. In this video I have added the science fiction module to give us access to power armour, spaceships and cyberware, but I have not activated any extensions. This is just using the base rule set. What I want to do is make some power armour. I want to add some modifications to it and bolt on an anti-tank gun. So to do that I'm going to go to items, I'm going to click the button down here. I want to add armour, so we'll click on that. That opens up an empty armour field and we have some new fields. So group, this exists now for all weapons and armour and other items. We'll come back to that in a bit. We'll come down to type. You can see we have body armour, power armour and shields. If you're just building armour, you'll just select body armour, where it will just say, right, what's the armour value, the area is protected, the weight and the cost. If you are creating a shield, then if you pick shield, it loses the field about where the area protection is. The one in the middle here, power armour, adds quite a few modifications. First things first, it adds a size, adds heavy armour pace in your running die, so this is here as well. Obviously there's the weight. And then we have a modifications and a mounted weapons. Let's say it's a +4 heavy armour. When wearing this armour, we'll say it gives you a pace of 8 and a D8 running dice. So what I'm going to do is just pick up the D8, hold down the Alt key and drop it on there. So now we have a pace of 8 with a running dice of D10. Weight we're not going to worry about. Cost we're not going to worry about. Modifications. So what we'll do here is we'll come down and we'll pick power armour modifications, and I'm going to give it an anti-personnel system, we'll give it the flight capabilities, and we'll also make it self-sealing. Now on the right hand side here you see that basically flight costs 3 modules and anti-personnel costs 1 and self-sealing is 1, so that's 5. So in there you put a cost of 5, and maybe this rule set, this particular power armour is allowed 10 modules. As you saw there, these have to be done manually. There is no automatic calculation. Obviously what I should have done was given it a name. We'll call it Mega Super Power Armour. And the last things we need to do is fit some weapons to it. So if we go back to here, we'll give it a very big laser gun. And I think what we'll also do is we'll give it a nice laser sword. As you can see there, you do not actually have to drop the modifications or the weaponry into the exact zone. I just dropped it anywhere at the end there. So at the end of all that, what we do have here is a nice suit of Mega Super Power Armour. So we're going to call this, we're going to put this in its own group called Mega Armour, which, as I say, we'll come back to later on. And we can then basically open up one of our characters. We'll open up Marksman, and if we go to the inventory and armour, we can see there's nothing there, so obviously we can literally just drag and drop it there, or we can just drag it, hold down the Alt key, drop it on Marksman, and as you can see it automatically adds it to the armour tab, and then all we'll do is we'll equip it, and when we go back to the skills tab we can now see he's got heavy armour on and a toughness of 9. We've already created the Mega Super Power Armour, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a lightsaber. Not a laser sword because I know that's already in there. We're actually going to create a nice lightsaber, if I can spell it correctly. We're going to put this in the laser swords group. So I'll come back to that in a second. This is a melee weapon. We'll say it does 3d6 damage and it's a heavy weapon. And it's got an AP of 3 for argument's sake, and that's all we're going to worry about. That fumble range, well, maybe it's a bit more dangerous, so we'll say on a 1 or 2 you will fumble it. So we've added that in, and there we go. What the groups did, I've done this on the Mega Super Armour and on the lightsaber. We now go to the melee tab. You can see there's a new group called Laser Swords, and in there's the lightsaber I've created. Likewise, if we go to armour and scroll down under Mega Armour, there's your Mega Super Power Armour. So basically you can now create your own groups that show up on the inventory lists for the players You don't need to use any XML coding or anything else. You literally can create groups on the fly and they'll show up in the equipment lists. PC inventory items can now have effects assigned to them that will only work when they're currently equipped on the character. To demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is go into items. I'm going to create a new item. I'm going to call it a bullet. Well, bulletproof's not the right word, but we'll call it a bulletproof vest. Okay. It's going to be body armor. It's going to provide 3 points of armor. And we're going to say it protects the torso. We won't worry about weight or cost. What we will do, however, is when we get down here, we'll open up the squared brackets and say it is ranged armor plus 4. When rolling damage for a ranged attack, you'll get plus 4 armor. So maybe I should really call it better ranged protection rather than a bulletproof vest, because unfortunately you can't say only bullets. Lasers, any attack from a ranged weapon will basically give better protection. We'll drag this, drop it onto driver, come back to the inventory, and we can see at the moment, if we go to skills first, actually he's got toughness of 5, and if we go back to the inventory and go to armor and equip the armor, he's now got the plus 3 from the armor, but it doesn't show the plus 4 for the ranged armor. So what we'll do, we'll open up the combat tracker, we'll add the driver in, we'll bring back our now infamous Orc Chieftain, we'll drop him on there, and we'll kick off a combat. So we shall just basically, and what we haven't done is we haven't given the Orc Chieftain a ranged weapon. I'll type in M16 and I will drag it and drop it onto the character sheet, and now we can see that the Orc Chieftain has an M16. Obviously he'll target driver, and we'll roll straight off for the damage. And what you can see here is that basically driver has toughness 12 versus armor, the 3 from the armor and the 4 for being range protection. If we just hit him with the normal damage and get a roll that actually works, we can see that basically he only has toughness 8. The plus 4 ranged armor is not counted. Maybe though we don't want to give driver heavy armor. I mean, after all, he sits in a car all day. What we may want to give him is something that makes him a better driver. So if we go, we add a button, and we'll say we'll give him some gloves of driving, and in the effects we'll just put driving plus 2D to add 2 dice to his driving skill, which is fine. We'll then drop that onto his sheet, equip it, and as you can see at the moment his driving is a D8, but when we roll this it's now a D12 because he has the gloves of driving. In this section I will be covering vehicles and their functionality in Combat Tracker. I will also be showing you how you can set which skill is required to operate a vehicle. You can now also set NPCs or player characters to operate weapons on vehicles, and this will use the correct trait dice based on the gunner. So if we go to vehicles and find the armoured personnel carrier, and we drag it and drop it onto driver while holding down the Alt key, we can then open up driver, go to his inventory, and we can see he has an armoured personnel carrier on the vehicles tab. So we can click on this, we can open it up. If we unlock it, we can set the manoeuvre type. Obviously being a ground based vehicle, we'll set this to driving, but you can see all the other skills are set there. So we'll say this vehicle requires driving. We go to the combat tab, we can scroll down a bit, and what we can do here is we can say that driver is obviously the operator of this vehicle, the driver, and as you can see he's going to use his driving skill when driving the vehicle. In addition, at the moment he's using the autocannon and the minigun. We don't want that. We want the marksman, who's got a better shot, to be using the autocannon. So what we do is we just drag up the marksman and we drop him on the minicannon. As you can now see, it's going to be critical fail, not the best of rolls, but he's going to be using his shooting dice on the minigun. So if we open up the combat tracker and put the vehicle on the combat tracker, we can see that basically the vehicle has a toughness of 32 and armor of 17, and on the space and reach an extra tab's been added in for speed. This lets you to keep track of the current vehicle speed. So we can see that the armored personnel carrier has an acceleration of 5, so Assuming this vehicle was stationary, in this round the maximum speed it can get to is 5. And that will just keep there. You can see that the driving trait's set, and you can see that the autocannon is using a D10 and the minigun is using a D6. And obviously you can still set this vehicle to be targeting NPCs, so if we go back and find our poor old Orc Chieftain, drop him back on the tracker, we can see that we can basically target the Orc Chieftain with the armoured personnel carrier and then shoot him with the minigun. During combat, certain critical hits on vehicles can render weapons damaged. So this can be done by opening up the vehicle on the character sheet. If you go to the combats, we say the minigun's been damaged, so you just make sure it's editable. Right mouse button on the minigun, you can set it to broken, and now the minigun will not be usable. The minigun is disabled here, but it still shows up on the combat tracker. And if you remember from part 1, that's because entries on the combat tracker are separate entities from any database entities. Therefore, the only way you can actually update the combat tracker would be to delete this vehicle and add it back in. This being a player character's vehicle is less of an issue because, of course, the players wouldn't necessarily use the combat tracker to control the vehicle. They would be using it here, so obviously you'd open this up, he'd go to combat and he wouldn't be able to use the minigun, but they can still do the shooting dice for the autocannon until, of course, we break that as well, which as a player we can also do. And now all of a sudden they're in severe trouble because they've lost all their guns. This functionality is not currently in place for NPC vehicles, however it will be added in before 4.6 is released. So you will be able to update and damage NPC based vehicles in the combat tracker and remove weapons. So if we add in a NPC armoured personnel carrier, turn on the attacks, at the moment what you have to do if you wish to damage a weapon is you would have to middle mouse button on it, bring it open, then you can open it up and then delete the attack. That will then remove the weapon from the combat tracker, but ultimately the intention is to add the damaged functionality back into the combat tracker for NPC based vehicles. You may have noticed the chase icon is missing from the sidebar. That's because that functionality has been incorporated into the combat tracker, therefore there is just one window required to do both chases and combat. To switch between them you use the tracker button at the bottom here, so if we click on it, it changes from combat to chase, and to switch back just click it again. So what we'll do is we'll set up a chase, we'll turn on the show cards. What we have here is an attack helicopter flown by the infamous Orc Chieftain. Will be chasing the armoured personnel carrier driven by the player characters. As you can see here, the Orc Chieftain is the pilot and he's also going to be handling the weaponry. We've set the trait on the attack helicopter to piloting, and we've set the trait on the vehicle to driving. Now we're not going to worry about the modifiers or anything else due to different speeds. We're just going to use this to demonstrate the new functionality. So basically on the first round of the chase, obviously the skills array made. So we'll have the piloting roll made by Orc Chieftain, he got a 9, so we'll drop that on there, that will give him 2 cards, and the driving roll by the player character also gets a 9, so we'll drop that on there. Now in each case it will automatically pick the best card. Normally you do not want to use clubs if it's your highest card, unless you can avoid it, but for this case I will. But if you did want to change it, then you just double click on the card you actually want in the chase tracker. So then we'll basically activate the attack helicopter. We will then go through the rules of the chase. When we move down to the armoured personnel carrier, it will automatically roll on the chase complication because they have a club. In this case you can see it's a minor obstacle. And the chase will continue on like that. And in all other ways the functionality hasn't changed, other than the fact that complications are done, and obviously you can now drag and drop the trait roll straight on to automatically deal the correct number of cards. This concludes my video on the new features added in version 4.6 of the Savage Worlds rule set for Fantasy Grounds. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments section or over at the Fantasy Grounds website in the Savage Worlds forum threads. I will include a link below. If you have any suggestions for future videos,
please ask. Thank you. Goodbye.